And as I told the others, I need to take a quick 1 minute break in about 5 minutes to do something, but it will take about a minute to do. So you guys keep talking. The first topic today has to do with restraint techniques. Because we can restrain a person standing up, we can restrain a person when they're down on the ground. Different techniques, but it's still a restraint. How long can you possibly restrain a person before it becomes ineffective? Or do you have to change the hold to another restraint or alternative solution, risking a reversal or escape by your attacker? Then we get into the issue of restraint versus. I did some additions into the outline last night because it's just. I had restraint versus proper hold. Using pressure nerve press as a supplement. What is a strategy once you have pinned a person on the ground, or they're in an arm bar, wrist lock, little finger come along, etc. What do you do after that? And is there a point where a restraining technique must become incapacitating, which means you ultimately end up injuring the person? So those are the kind of the parameters for the first topic. So anybody want to launch into it? Or
I could add a couple of things, Sensei. I've seen throughout my time in training, there's been some confusion with that very question. Meaning, if someone feels like they're in a position to where they have to use something as a restraint, and then applying a technique that is not necessarily effective as a restraint, then there's confusion there because let me go with the latter of the two. If you're applying a technique that is not really designed as something that is effective as a restraint, then you have to be able to move on. And the reason why I'm saying move on, because there's two different types of outcomes, right? One, if you're trying to use the technique as an entry to something to inspire, if you will, someone to move or react or respond or comply to what you're doing, then you need to continuously apply, or what I like to use as throttle, the amount of pressure that you're applying, or the amount of the technique that you're applying in an effort to have them comply to what you want them to do. But even those techniques have a limit, or even that throttling has a limit, because you can continue to throttle, pull back, add to as you're doing it, but you can only do that for so long or so far before creating damage or injury, right? So if you're not trying to damage or injure someone, for example, if we're saying that we're using a wrist lock,
I'll be right back. I'm going.
You can only apply that so far before you either doing damage to the wrist or even breaking it. So you have to move on and understanding what is the next thing that you can do that allows you to maintain control or compliance, to be in an effort to continue to have them comply to what you're doing or use it as a restraint. So that's part. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I have a thought about that by myself, because I thought, what do I do if somebody attacks me and you have to do something? Then I thought, you maybe will be one possibility would be to reuse a technique as many times until the other person understands to stop. So you might have to restrain him and make a hard strangle and say, that's enough. And then
you can, but you have to remember that.
Let him get up and then do it one more time again, and then throw him down on the stairs, say that's enough, and see if you do it 3 or 4 times, then he must understand that now it should be enough.
Well, yeah, you can, but you have to understand by doing that, you're compromising yourself. So I mean, if the way that you say it, you would say, okay, I'm going to let you go, thinking that you can do it again, and you may not be able to do it again, right? Or
Yeah,
even let's
that's
take it as a lesser scenario. Let's say you had the technique and you never completely let it go, but you're using it as what I refer to as a throttle, and you're throttling the pressure to make them comply because it's more uncomfortable, or you're releasing the pressure. You have to remember that every time that you give a little bit of space, that gives someone else an opportunity to do something else. Once you release the compliance pressure, then they can do something else. And so you compromise your own spot. And so you have to be able to move on, not to something that is going to be detrimental to the person you're applying. If you don't want to do damage to them, you have to be able to do something to where, and that's where the confusion comes in, to something that is applicable in an effort to restrain them and what is going to be effective in doing so. So two different things. One is people are confused with, okay, what technique can I use in an effort to restrain someone, but they apply something such as a wrist lock, which will eventually get numb to the pressure that you're applying. So then you use the method of throttling, but every time that you release that pressure, you compromise yourself. So that's not really, in my opinion, that's not really a restraint type scenario. Something else, whether you're using it in standing, as Sensei Kirby said, or if you're using it on the ground, or wherever you may be, it's just not one of those techniques that are designed to have you be throttling or applying or releasing the technique. You just compromise yourself. So I think that's where the confusion is with a lot of people that I've seen in the past in training.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I just thought it through to myself, but I think, what is the option? Do you have to do it, or do you take a strong stranglehold and hold him down for as long as it takes? That is probably the best solution. But it's also, the thing is that at some point you lose your strength. Then you have to have him in such a good position that you really have his weight on him, on his back or on his neck, so he can't get up. So you really have to use your whole body weight to keep him down and have him in a very good lock. But the other options, that you do a technique over and over again, I went through that. Is it right? But I agree on it that seems very difficult, because you have to restrain him, you have to keep him with all your force, and it could take 5 to 10 minutes before you get help from other people, the police
Yeah,
or
and
something.
look, that's a good point, Joni. But I also think, and this is where law enforcement gets into trouble, because they think that using their entire body weight, or laying on somebody, or placing their knee on their neck, or whatever it might be, that's where they get into trouble, because that's the inexperience. That's a clear demonstration of inexperience in what they're doing in an effort to be able to restrain someone, to keep them in a safe position, and then ultimately something bad happening, because they don't know. That's where education comes in. So like, it doesn't take your weight, or that amount of pressure in a certain or specific area to be able to put someone in an effective restraint hold, but it does take your ability and knowledge and experience to understand what would be effective and what would not be effective, and also what would injure someone, and what is the end result of that specific or that technique that you're applying. And so I think that in law enforcement, especially, that has been exposed through media, because of the end result of things that has been terminal in a lot of cases, or less than, but most case scenarios, the ones that are exposed in the media, is because somebody was significantly injured, or even worse. And so that's absolutely the result of their inability to understand the technique and their experience associated with it.
The other thing is, if you take a hand lock or a wrist lock or something, you can hold it for a while, but then if you put more force on it, you'll eventually break or damage the hand, and then I don't know, can you control it with pain after that, or is the other one getting up? So that's what I'm thinking. For me, I would have, because I don't know if you have a stronger guy, so I would have to use my body weight on the person to keep him down, especially if you are a smaller person than the opponent. So if I would have to do a technique, I'll try to make a technique that he will land on his stomach and then put pressure with my body weight, with the stranglehold, or with a other lock or something like hands behind the and use my body weight, because that's the only option I would have to not get tired and hold it for long enough so I get extra help.
Okay, let me get a few words in here from experience from either mine or some of my upper belts. Pinning up, how do I say? Pinning is, how do you say it? It might keep a person on the ground, but that's really about it. Pinning a person is not really a restraining hold or control hold. Okay, it keeps the person on the ground. If a restraint is something that either keeps a person from moving, or control hold is to get them to move in a certain direction. Okay, the problem with I had a black belt years ago who went after a purse snatcher, pulled a screwdriver on him, and he threw him in the hand throw and put him in a shoulder lock pin. It took the police 10 minutes to get there. He was afraid because he had one of his legs under his opponent, and that was part of the shoulder lock pin. His leg had fallen asleep, and he was afraid he was going to have to let go. Now, this guy stood 6 foot 15 inches. But, okay, you can only maintain a pin on the ground for so long, then your own body will not allow you to continue. You have to do something else. A choke might result, you might have to choke him out. Okay. And choking a person out does not necessarily mean killing them. Okay, because usually once you release a choke, the human body would prefer to live and it'll start breathing again, unless you've done some other damage. Wrist and the thing about doing a hand throw, if you apply too much pressure, you might break the wrist. Well, that's what the technique is designed to do. Okay, most Aikido techniques, even though they look nice and polite and hunky-dory, if the attacker doesn't comply, something gets broken. And that's the hardest thing for a person who's attacked to accept, that they've injured another person. And unfortunately, many martial artists don't realize that if they follow through on a lot of the locks, holds, kimuras, whatever you want to call them, it's ultimately going to injure the attacker, because the attacker is resisting, not because you're setting a hold. They resist. I've been in court on this once, so if they choose to resist, it's going to cause them more pain, and ultimately they will, they will break their wrist or what have you. You didn't do that. Okay, it's a different mindset. Now, I know your intent is not to hurt. No one's intent is ever to hurt another person. Okay, because then you've got another issue. But I think you have to realize that some techniques cannot be maintained for a long time. You can throttle, and maybe that'll exert some control. I've found from experience that if I put a person in a control hold, which I've had to do a number of times, and that doesn't seem to be working, I will add a pressure point or nerve attack to the base of their neck, etc., and use that. I call it the Spock technique. And that ultimately, the combination of the two will get compliance, because now they're feeling pain in two areas, and that you can control. And they begin to realize that if they want to go one way, it's going to hurt. If they want to go another way, it's going to hurt. Because now you're doing two different things. You're essentially, as Darren said, you're throttling, but you're throttling two things, I guess, in compliance with each other, in support of each other. So that's the other issue. Part of the problem is a restraint technique will work many times. And I've used them. I've had law enforcement people use them. They do work. Where you run into problems, as Darren said, is when you have, and I've seen it again many times, where some law enforcement personnel will do things that are not, the term is that at least in the US, every agency is supposed to have what's known as a use of force policy, where you can only, supposedly you follow a certain sequence in your how you treat a suspect. And there are some things that if you watch some police videos with what we know today, starting in 1994 with Rodney King, it's unfortunate there are some police who don't have adequate training, use poor judgment, what have you. It happens in every profession, whether you be a police officer or a neurosurgeon. People make mistakes. But the idea is through training, you hopefully get them to not do things that are going to cause an injury caused by them rather than the person that they're trying to control or keep from hurting them if you're a civilian. Okay. Your intent as a civilian is to get away from this person. And different states, have different laws on what you can do. All the way from stand your ground to only what's considered reasonable force. And that you have multiple definitions of that too. And as Darren said, if you release, in a street situation, you can't look for a person who's going to tap out or say mate, or you're going to decide after a certain point, I can let go and let's see what's going to happen. Is it worth taking that risk that might result in bodily injury to you? And that's a judgment call. And you can't predetermine what this person is going to do. You let go of the person, they may simply go away. They may simply walk away.
I think you need to have the presumption that it's a ploy. I mean, when you have somebody in a wrist lock, it makes them panic. Like, unless they're a student of jujitsu, that's not something they've encountered before. It makes them panicky. And they're going to say things. Okay, man, you got me. Yeah, okay, man. And you just let go of that wrist lock, and then they keep that hand away from you this next time. But like you said, sometimes though, it is sufficient to put them in that wrist lock and terrify them, and then you let go and they run away.
Right.
And that's I think another part of the restraint is, we're talking about why you shouldn't let go of it. And I agree, like when you're in that situation, you should never let go of it and never try the same thing twice. Because like a magician, you don't do the same trick twice. And they used to call jujitsu things tricks, right?
Right.
But the other part is, I guess it's also situational. There are, like, for instance, when I'm playing with my daughter, I will do the same thing over and over and over and over. And, that's a different scenario of, play things. Or like if it was a drunk best friend and he's being silly or whatever, and you need to do something, you might do the same thing over and over and over. And, you're letting go and come on, man, stop. But it's identifying that point where that restraint becomes a real thing. And then what do you do next? Once it's a real restraint situation, you can't let go. And then I'm kind of concerned about the gray area of what's next. If there's I think there would be an external appearance that you have the situation under control because they're in an arm bar or whatever on the ground. But the moment you let go of that, you're exactly in the same situation, but they're twice as mad at you. So you can't do that. But then if you break their arm while you have them down, you're completely the aggressor who just attacked an incapacitated person who isn't in a position to harm you. But if you don't do that, they're absolutely going to harm you. Like, think of what they just did to you without knowing you and without being angry at you. Now you just pinned them and like threatened to break their arm. Next time they get up, they're going to try to kill you, not mug you, you know? But you also can't just break their arm or choke them at that point. So that's another kind of thing that's interesting there. Like, when do you become the aggressor when you're in that kind of situation?
I actually have an example from a street situation where I went away from a bar and somebody just got annoyed on me and wanted to fight, and he started swinging his hands, and I said I had to block and swing back, but I said to him, I can you two stop, I don't want to fight. I can you two stop, I don't want to fight. And every time I said it, he came again to attack me. And I had my friends with me, and he also said, the guy, can you two stop attacking him? But when I punched him hard enough, then he stopped. So I think the whole thing has to do with understanding. You have to make the other guy to understand, to stop, and you have to actually use a bit of harsh force to make an angry guy stop, especially if he's drunk. You really have to use force, because the first punches I took very lightly, but when I punched him hard enough, then he understand to stop. So it has to do with understanding. And he came, like I said, stop, I can you to stop, don't fight with me. But he came again. But until I used the force that needed to be forced to him to stop, then he stopped.
Okay. I will say that, I mean, I've been through this situation where I had a person restrained, an adult gang member restrained. Was a rear arm lock and proper hold and nerve press, and I've gotten that this junior heard that, and I got the person up to the counseling office where it was after school. I was hoping someone was there. His counselor was there, and she asked him, if Mr. Kirby lets you go, do you because he was threatening you the place. And that should have been a signal to me not to let go. And he said to her, I won't do anything. The only smart thing I did at that point was, as I released him, I pushed him away from me. Okay. To create some space. And that's if you're going to, and so if you have a person in a restraining hold, and you let go, you need to have a way of creating some space between you, so that if he's going to attack, he has to advance towards you, and that makes him the attacker. Okay, this person who was also somewhat high on drugs, which is why I had to use two things to get some control of it. Then he turned around and tried to hit me and kick me at the same time. He hit my glasses, which made it felony assault in California against a teacher. But gravity works. He fell to the ground. I rolled him over, used a nerve, rolled him over, put an arm lock. At that point, 2 Metro police showed up who happened to be in the next room. They handcuffed him, foot cuffed him, and took him away. But the point is, it really is a judgment call. You have to, in my book, the only way I would probably let a person go, and there have been times since then where I've had to put people, either high school students, gang members, in restraining hold, and I would not let them go until someone could put cuffs on them. because I learned from that one experience. And that happened 2 or 3 times since then. No, teachers are not allowed to carry handcuffs. But if you can talk a person down, and if you got them in a control hold, you can feel when their body is calming down. I mean, that's a good indicator for you, but it doesn't mean you can just shake hands and say, let's go get a beer. It's too late to go for a beer. You want to do that before there's an altercation. But sometimes that works. But restraining a person is an iffy situation. And there's really no clear answer as to how successful it will be. And that's why you need to have, if this doesn't work, what do I do next? If he resists a hand throw or a wrist lock, am I going to maintain it to the point where he breaks his wrist? Or am I going to let go and try and go for something else and risk the chance that I may get assaulted because I go? I won't let go of a hold unless I know there's something else I can really easily get into real fast. And that's why one of the things I started doing with my students a few years ago is when you see an extremity in a particular direction and you're in wrestling, whatever you want to call it, that's the extremity. If you see a bent elbow sticking up, my brain says, roll that elbow forward or backwards. Okay. If I see a hand grabbing towards my wrist, I will get around that wrist to the forearm to control his arm. You have to, it's kind of like, it's a different approach to doing techniques rather than saying, for this situation, you do this technique. It's if you see this, if you see what's available, if something is available, you use it. And it shouldn't be rocket science. I mean, if a person's neck is available, I will use it. Whether it be a choke or a strangle or a nerve attack or a strike. Okay. And that's one of the concepts you have to get students to understand in terms of self-defense. You don't get to choose the technique.
I actually have a other situation when I was a peacekeeper in Kosovo. They never get on the bottom because when I was a peacekeeper, we had heavy plates on, and there was a guy that tried to attack some UNMIK police officers behind me, and I had to make a kupinake to this guy. And because of having the plates on and I was heavy, when I tried to do the throw, he landed on top of me, and then after that, I had no possibility other than take a stranglehold when he was on me and on the ground, and I just hold on so he couldn't hit me in the face. But luckily, he was in shock of the throw that he didn't try to do anything else after it. Until I had to hold him until the police officers, they watch for a while what is happening over there, and then they come and lifted him up from me and put him in the handcuffs. But when you unbutton and you, for example, you have heavy plates on, I also can some Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's very hard to get away when the guy has all his weight on you and you have restrained him in a stranglehold or something. You can't really get out of the situation. It's pretty tough.
It is one of the things that a lot of, I mean, I've taught law enforcement, and once you put on the belt, what do you call that belt that they're wearing? I forget the term, but that is all their gear and paraphernalia on it, the vest. It's a whole different ball game in terms of moving around on the ground. I mean, you are right, Joni, and you don't. That's why you if you're going to train a particular group of people, you want to be, what will they be wearing I say, if they're wearing all what they normally wear, how effectively can they do? What techniques are going to work best for them? And how do they get out if they're underneath? How do they get out of that? I mean, we do. See, I wouldn't have pinned him to me. I would have gone for his head and either done a key turn or something that, yes, it could conceivably cause injury to him. But how do you say, if you're defending yourself, you cannot be concerned with what you're doing to the attacker because he doesn't care what you're doing. He's doing to you. I mean, I'm not saying you should be just as immoral as he is, but your concern is survival.
Yeah, and being on the bottom that's not nice. After that, I learned that I started training more stand-up techniques, more Krav Maga style, that you stand up and use atemi strikes or strikes to the nerve positions, or make a leg sweep or something like that. You always are upright after you have tried the technique, because that was a mishap using the kupinab with heavy equipment on. Then you really landed on the bottom, and you had no opportunity just to try to keep him close to your head, that he can't use his fist and hit you hard.
Okay, well, let's move on here. Okay. Does anyone want to summarize what we covered, or have anybody have any conclusions out of this, or? Go ahead, Darren.
I think the conclusion is every application of a technique in an effort to do, whether it's a restraint or technique applied, is subjective to the scenario itself.
Anybody else want to throw anything in there?
Sounds like if you're going to break his arm, do it right away, not after holding it in a restraint for 20 minutes.
I would agree with you on that 120%.
I'm also on that one.
Yeah, I think the issue is that because we're moral people, we try to do the least we have to do to get away from the situation. The other side of the coin, as my sensei put it so adeptly, is that if you do a technique and the attacker resists, he injures himself, you don't injure him. And so you have to take a different perspective when you're protecting yourself. That if you're doing a technique, I'm helping the attacker go where he wants to go. If he chooses to change direction, he's the one that messed up, not me. I mean, it's to an extent, it's a warped mindset. I would agree with that, but you have to have some rationale that follows a pattern and makes sense, and then you can argue it.
Sensei, I see that in class all the time, and I talk about it to lower belt ranks, that when they anticipate what they think a technique is going to be, and then they try to fall a different way. And I said, look, if you're anticipating a technique to try to fall out of it, and you injure yourself that way, right? Because you took the wrong call, because you were anticipating what you thought was going to happen to you. And I think that's no different than what you're explaining in real life. Someone, they don't know, but they choose to go in the wrong direction, they actually injure themselves. Same difference in class. They can injure themselves as well.
I mean, I know as a sensei, if I do a demo somewhere or visiting another dojo, and on occasion there'll be someone who they just want to see what happens if they resist. I'll let go of the technique in practice, because I don't want to injure. It'll get to a point where I say, okay, I have to let go because I don't want to injure her, and this is not a situation where survival is at stake. But that's entirely different from a street situation where the intent of the other person is to injure you. And that's, you know, anyway. Okay. What is this? Here we're going to go, because we're not really getting away from this topic, but the next one is what is the impact of MMA on self-defense? We still worry about pellet grabs and wrist grabs, or are we concerned about MMA style techniques? Are we more concerned about counters? If so, how does that affect what we teach?
Here in Finland, actually, I have seen they have renewed their belt techniques, and then when I trained, there was actually Juika Tame was the hold you learned. And that was just in the early 90s when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came on top, and there was the Gracie family showing they were good in MMA. Then there wasn't actually so much ground fighting. There was defense on the ground against kicks and making a leg sweep with your hands if somebody kicks you. And then there were Juika Tame and locks on the ground. But actually, nowadays, they have added more techniques in their belt test from MMA in Finland, actually, because they have seen that this can be a problem. People have been so good on the ground in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu that people have dropped off the carrots on fighting on the ground. And that's actually why I don't want to go on the ground anymore, because I don't know how much people already can ground techniques better than I can, because there hasn't, from when I started, it was always stand-up position, throws, kicks, hits, blocks, and leg sweeps, and the whole thing was actually upright, and you just sweep the guy out on the ground and make a finishing technique and a knife attack back, and that was it. It was one technique, one fight, and it was over. But nowadays, people fight a lot on the ground and learn how to move on the ground and how to take new holds on the ground and how to shift holds on the ground. They're pretty good at it. So I don't know if this traditional jiu-jitsu has fallen a bit behind this ground fighting, because that's a lot nowadays in ground fighting.
Okay, the only response I can give is a lot of the, how do you say it, box, et cetera, hand throws, key turns, et cetera, nerve attacks, shark bites, biting a person, sticking a finger in their ear. All of these things work on the ground. They're on the ground. None of them are within the allowed MMA, BJJ sport. We discussed this last time. Okay. And I think what we have to do as sensei, make sure that our students get experience on the ground using these techniques against MMA type attacks, or whatever you want to call it, ground. Because we do the technique standing up, they look nicely, they look pretty. Okay. On the ground, they pretty much all look like garbage, even though they're well done. You're using a whole different set of muscles if you're on the ground. It's physically exhausting compared to standing up. But the students need to have experience with that. Because once they're aware that a lot of the stuff they've learned standing up will work on the ground, it improves their sense of self-confidence on the ground. That's what's important. No, the ground is the worst place to be. I'll agree with that, 100%. But you have to, if you're learning techniques standing up, you should also be learning them lying down on the ground or sitting down. And what you have to realize is that nearer you are to the ground, the more leverage you have. And that's why I said you would have this person close to you and try to choke them. I probably would have gone for their head and done it. And you don't, how do you say, if you're doing it on the ground, you don't want to take that head and make a nice wide arc, because now it frees up their hands and everything to attack you. You want to make love to their head, for lack of a better phrase. You want their y-axis right in line with your axis, because as you turn their head, you're also going to turn your body. Okay, because you want to get out of that position. But if you turn their head and it happens to break their neck, which is not what you want to happen, but it can. Okay. They were attacking you. Okay. I mean, it's say part of learning a martial art for self-defense is having a mindset. And if you don't have that mindset, you will never, your chances of surviving on the street are really reduced. And I know that's not a nice thing to say. And I've upset people with that by saying that. But what's the alternative? That's
actually a technique. That's what you told. You lock the other leg and turns the head around, and the other guy can tip over. But the only problem is if you have heavy equipment, you have hard to get on top of.
I'm not trying to get up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you just break his neck, then it's over.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're concerned about getting a person off of you, getting up is not your primary concern. Your concern is getting him off of you. Once you get him off of you and taken care of in one form, then you can get up.
True.
So all I'm saying is that on the, it's like standing up. If a person attacks you, you're not going to, if they swing at you, you're not just going to block their hand out of the way and stand there. You're going to take a step back, or you're going to push them back, so they have to take a step towards you, so that you always want them to be the aggressor, or at least it creates the illusion that they are the aggressor, which works better in the US. But your concern is not, your concern in a standing situation is to get the person away from you, or to thwart the attack. Your purpose on the ground, if that person is on top of you, is to get them off of you, not to get up. If your prime concern is getting up, it's never going to happen.
It's not a nice situation to be in, but you panic a bit, because you just hold on to the guy that you know if he gets the leverage and start hitting you,
right.
You try. So you are in a bit of a panic, and you know that if you let go now, then he stands up and he can get you, or you open your lock or something. You know he can get up and he can hit you. So you do everything you can to just keep him close and trying to hold him in a stranglehold until you get help. That was my experience at that time. But it's true. If you do it fast, you should be very fast to tip his head over, but you have to do it hard so he goes off of you, because you cannot move with him. So you have to really use your force to get him off him.
Right. I mean, like I said, you basically want his head as close to your head as possible during the technique. Because if you give him any room, he will hit, he will do other things. If you can keep his head close to you, he can't really do anything with his arms or hands, because that's the way the human body moves. And ultimately, it's easier to control a person's head than it is their body. That's why in martial arts, so many of the techniques involve controlling the extremities because that in turn controls the body. And the head is an extremity. So that's, I mean, that's again, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm right, or I'm wrong and you're right. I'm just saying, it's we would each probably do different things. Both of them work as long as you can get this person off of on top of you. And so, because how long would you be able to maintain that?
Not for long, not for long. It's like against busy aggressive and he's using all his force. You can't really hold on for a long time.
And all he really has to do to compromise your grip is to bring his knees up so he can get his butt in the air, and then he just moves upwards towards your head and you lose your grip,
Yes.
which he probably didn't think of.
Yeah, he quoted Jujitsu, so that was the good part about
Right.
the whole.
But anyway, okay, so get back to the question, has MMA affected, what's its impact been on our concept of self-defense?
So I think one thing, growing up, everything was always, in every martial art, you're looking at it like, how do you defend yourself against an unarmed attacker? Or not unarmed, I mean, untrained, sorry. An untrained attacker. With, I guess, the presumption that if they're a trained attacker, they would be police or military, and you're probably a criminal, right? Like, they're the good guys. So, that's not who's attacking you. So you got the ruffian trying to do something, and they're untrained. So an untrained person historically then is going to try to grab you to hit you, or they're going to hit you. So everything looks like, a big wide punch. They're not doing karate punches because then they're trained. So, they're these big wide haymaker cowboy punches. If they grab your shirt, the other hand is going to do a cowboy punch. If they grab your wrist, the other hand is going to come and do a cowboy punch. And that's kind of what you're looking at. And then if you get into karate, there's like sparring where you're doing karate against karate stuff. But the self-defense is always kind of, this person's going to try to punch you. And maybe they would try to wrestle you, but more punch you. And now I think that's not really what you're afraid of. What you're afraid of is they're going to try to wrap around your waist, yank your legs out from under you, and then you're going to bash your head onto the cement and die. Like, that's now the untrained attack. Like, they're not going to try to give you a haymaker. They're going to try to, everyone has a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now. You know what I mean? Like, nobody is completely untrained. Now they're all at least really bad at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They've played it in video games, watched it on TV, all of that stuff. And like, so they think they've seen these techniques all the time, and they think, I'm just going to take this person down by pulling their legs out. But that is a devastating, lethal thing to do to somebody in a real situation on cement with a sidewalk where there's different levels of curb versus the road. You hit a car on the way down, like, it becomes very serious. And kind of to that mentality you were talking about, that haymaker in the bar, there's just so many degrees of response you could give. It doesn't have to be extreme. But now if somebody tries to hug your waist, your response has to be swift and extreme. Even if their intention wasn't, to be lethal, they're not understanding the things now they're doing because they are untrained. So I think it's a really different landscape now of what you're actually going to get attacked with. And, nobody wants to be on the ground, so you have to not let that happen. And what is the escalation of that? If somebody threw that haymaker at you, it may have stopped there if they hit you and they prove their point and they leave. But if somebody grabs your waist, pulls your legs out from under you, and gets on top of you, the only next thing for them to do is start punching you in the face, like, unrelentingly. You can't let that happen. So, like, it makes everything much more extreme, much more quickly. And I don't know if you have time for a measured, careful response, or, you have to be extreme immediately. And so I think that's kind of where I see it shifted.
Well, I think what's happening, and I don't want to use your response has to be extreme.
That, you know,
That's just me. I would say you're if you're trained, you're responding out of motion, which is essentially you have no idea what you're doing at the time, and ultimately it may be extreme, but at the time,
right. Uncensored.
it was
Has uncensored response, yeah.
it's an uncensored response. At the time, that's what my body told me to do because that's how I'm trained. Or those are, that's, and it's hard to explain the concept of mushin to some, but I've had to explain it, and I said it's kind of like brushing your teeth. You don't go through each mental step of brushing your actually each tooth, etc., yada yada yada. You don't go through the mental. You just brush your teeth. Okay, and it's hard for people to understand that unless you give them that contour. You drive to work and you have to change freeways or highways 2 or 3 times because you're experienced at it. You just do it. You don't think, now I've got to get over 2 lanes. I'm going to get on Highway 10, and now I've got to move to the right 4 lanes. And there's someone coming up my left side. And you don't think about how you're driving to work. You just do it. And once they get that concept, then you can apply that to the martial arts, which is if you ever get in that situation, probably what could save your butt is that you just, because they now have a good analogy that they can work from. May not make them happy, but you have some common ground. And after all, they attacked you. And
I think it ties in kind of.
and the nice thing about jiu-jitsu is that it's not an offensive martial art. Okay, it could be if you work it out right, but it's normally it's considered a defensive art. We don't teach people how to attack other people, whereas karate does, or I don't think judo would be defensive. Aikido would be purely defensive. Karate, yes, it's both ways, but that's, it all depends on your own mindset and how you look at the art and what you can convince others of. And that whatever you did was defensive. If you accidentally stick your hand on a hot stove, what do? What's the first thing you do?
Pull your hand away.
You pull your hand away. Do you think about it?
No.
No. And that's the same thing with mushin. You don't think. There's no thinking involved. So what you could say that was a thoughtless act, but no, don't say that. Because that comes across as there's something mean, and that's not your intent. Anyway, I think we've killed this topic over the past 2 or 3 sessions. As Darren slightly smiles.
Sensei, I'll add 3 comments. Take it all the way back to the MMA part of it. If I'm practicing martial arts in an effort to be able to defend myself in real life scenarios, I'm never considering a combat sport as that scenario. I'm doing it in reality. And if I am in a real life situation to where I have to defend myself, the last thing or last place that I will ever want to be and do whatever I can within my control, fitting the scenario, is to be on the floor. And then if I do go to the floor for whatever reason, I'm going to defer back to number one. I'm not planning to participate in a combat sport environment. I'm practicing to preserve my own well-being.
Okay, keep on going, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's it becomes everything's life and death then. As soon as it's that kind of a thing, it's a life and death self-defense situation. You know, you can't really walk away from being on the ground. You know, you can't talk
Right.
your way out. It changes everything. It makes everything. And I think it kind of ties into what we were talking about before, where really we kind of need situational motion. Like you need the motion for when somebody doesn't really need a full response. You know, somebody's just being, you know, just doing something a little out of line and puts a hand on your shoulder. There's a subtle response for that, but then somebody tries to grab your waist. You need to have that response for that, you know, and like you said, it's not a sport. You know, their intention is different than reality. And that's a tough thing. You have to have the mindset of, you know, they did this, I'm helping them do what they're doing.
Right.
Because they don't know what they're getting themselves. They don't know what they've just done. You know, they might think they're doing something like, I'm just gonna do this one attack or whatever, and they're not understanding the severity of it and the severity of the response required.
Look, I'm not saying, and I didn't take your comments, Dan, as you saying this either, but I'm not saying that combat sports isn't brutal. It is. It is brutal.
Yeah.
Combat sports are brutal. They're very aggressive, right? But it's still not reality. It's still subject to rules and regulations. I mean, I could still do a lot of other things or use whatever I need to do to be able to have self-preservation.
And they're not expecting you to be unaccepting of those techniques. Like they're not expecting you to care that they're taking you to the ground, but we know you can't go there. And like, they're not expecting that you're afraid that your head's going to hit the ground or that there's other people or that you know, you can't now defend against his friends coming at you too. Yeah, it's that's what makes it, to them, it almost is a sport. Like they're trying to win that and you're trying to save your life. And those are two different things. Yeah. You can't try to win the scenario. You have to save your life.
Yeah. And I think we're also have crossed at least two of the three states of mind. You know, we're talking about the Mushin aspect of it, and then Dane had you know, I maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously had referred also to the Zanchin part of you know, the state of mind as well. So you have one that is, you know, responses without thought, and then one of them is alert and awareness to be able to respond, right? So you're looking at two of the three states of mind that you're responding to, at least right there. Yeah, you know, all three is Mushin, Zanchin, Budoshin. So looking at all of them.
Okay.
What's your levels?
Thomas, you want to say something? You've been very quiet today.
You all are doing fine. I've got anything to add, I'll jump in.
Okay. Okay, next topic, which is probably going to be our last one for the day, which is why do we train? Subtopics are, at what point has someone trained enough to justify feeling confident in their ability to actually defend themselves in real encounters? Can they stop training at that point? Is that amount of time worth it? You can spend a lifetime preparing for a fight that never comes, or when it comes, you lose. Nevertheless, you will continue training and receive value from that training until that point. So if there is value to the training and that value does not lie in making you an unstoppable force, what is the actual value of the training?
Okay, now I'll jump in.
Okay.
Getting Tom.
Not necessarily in that order, but is there a point where you can stop training? No. It depends on what you want to do. If you're trying to be proficient at breaking somebody's arm, think of that as playing the piano. Sorry for the analogy, but if
Sorry.
well, I can tell you after having my shoulder replaced, going back to the piano really was an education, because if you stop doing it, you're not practicing, you lose the skill. You may think you can do it, but you can't. It's because it's all muscle memory. Without the muscle memory, it's not going to work. And you lose the muscle memory if you stop practicing. So if that's all you're concerned about, no. But why do you train? People start for different reasons, and then it changes over time. For me, it's a challenge. Why? I'm never going to get perfect at this. And I need to have that kind of challenge. I need something that I can strive for that I'm never going to be able to achieve. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Those are awesome points. There's a saying in karate that karate is like boiling water. If you take it off the heat, it stops boiling.
Yep.
Exactly the same thing.
Very good, Dane.
That's a good point. Good way, good analogy. Yeah.
To your point.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I think Thomas, you've got a good position there. I think I continue on with it because I enjoy the practice. I enjoy seeing different ways of doing the same techniques, and sometimes I'll practice those as well. I've never, I don't think I've ever, Seki has never said, go faster, go faster. And I have never concerned myself with speeding up on techniques. And I don't stress that with my students either, because I kind of feel that as you get more proficient, you get smoother, and because you get smoother, you just naturally go faster. It becomes more of an automatic movement. Okay. And that's ultimately what we're after in everything we do, so that it becomes bullshit. And that's probably the goal. But you have to keep training. It's like if you don't ride the freeways for a while, you get kind of scared of driving on a freeway.
Yeah, I was trying to say, I think we would all agree. If you ask 1,000 people why you train, you're going to get 1,000 different answers. If you ask the same 1,000, is there a time when you should stop training? Then you're going to get the people who truly understand what you're trying to accomplish to say the answer is no. Like you should always continue to train, or this is, the water will stop boiling, if you will, right? So if you say otherwise, then you truly just don't understand the entire concept of what you're trying to prepare for.
Right. I want to see the water keep boiling, or I'm after perfection. Is there a difference? It's perfectly boiling water.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting
And so
that everyone,
because we never get to perfection, we never stop.
Right. Right.
Sorry, Dean.
it's interesting that everyone starts for the same kind of thing and stays for the same kind of thing. Like, we all thought we were looking for self-defense, but once you found it, you stayed and kept looking. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all could have stopped as white belts with the confidence that we could break a chokehold and let go of a wrist lock and all of that stuff. But you keep going because there's more to it. There's more you're getting from it. You're physically getting better at all of that stuff, but that stops being what you're interested in getting better at. Like you said, there's 1,000 different reasons why you started and what you're getting from it, but every single one of them says, yes, you just have to keep going. And there's something special about that, where it's more than what you learned. It's the learning itself. It's the continual, it's the seeking of perfection. Like, once you've perfected a technique, you haven't reached perfection. now you have to perfect every technique and you have to whatever. And
Well,
interesting how that gets replaced.
right.
You're in.
I think there's also a sense of gratification that we're after. We've worked really hard, we're getting better. That's our reward. Although we realize that there's more to learn.
Right.
It's kind of like, keep going until the day you drop dead. And hopefully
The right group of people also motivates you forward. If you find the right people, then you get more motivated.
right.
Yeah, for sure.
Throughout my time in training, I've never felt like I've ever wanted to stop. So that I think that's been good for me. I don't know that I've ever felt that way, but I have felt like at times I was really good. But through time, I've learned that I was not really as good as I thought I was, and I continue to learn, or I have at least started to learn. So the times that I thought I was really good, I'm trying to make sure that I get, at least compliant and to be effective in what I'm doing and actually learn something moving forward. But ups and downs throughout those training times. So.
Emphasize something that you said, Dane. We start for a whole bunch of different reasons. Oftentimes it's self-defense, but that's not why we stay. Most of us, anyway. If it's somebody's just saying, okay, all I want to be able to do is defend myself, then they're done. I'm not going to see them again. They're gone, and probably good that they left, because the people who stay on the mat, who practice, aren't going to hurt somebody. They're all in there trying to do the same thing. They're trying to get better, not because they've got to go out and fight somebody, but because it's a challenge to that they're taking on for themselves. Lots of things that people do. It's not just martial arts, but I don't want to do something that, okay, if I practice this enough times, I'll be perfect. Well, that's boring. I don't want to do that. Well, martial arts isn't going to let me do that. There's never going to be a point where I'm perfect.
Yeah, I think Sensei Kirby had mentioned he made a comment that, and one of the things that he was saying is, if you were subject to having to defend yourself or in a fight or an altercation or something like that, and in your training was your goal to win, and I think that the win part comes in a lot of different ways. Let's just say, for hypothetically, I'm being robbed and I have to defend myself. And in the effort of defending myself, the person that was the perpetrator has taken my wallet, my jewelry, my whatever, and has gotten away from me. Is that considered a loss? Or do I look at it in the fact that I was able to defend myself, and today I'm over here talking about that scenario because I've saved my life? Is that a win? So now you look at it like, that seems like a win to me. I mean, all of the other things were just material.
I think another perspective, and this, I think it's, even though I've experienced more with students as kids than adults, sometimes if you find success in something you are doing, you can acquire, if you put the same effort out in the other areas where you're having problems, you can succeed in those areas as well. And that's an important life lesson. And I know when I taught this in junior high, I constantly have teachers saying, can you, because I'd have a kid who's getting an A in my jiu-jitsu class, and I'd get a teacher, he's not doing well in math. He's got a D, and I'd really like to say, can you talk with him about, doing better and trying harder? I'll say, okay. And what I usually do is go to the kid and say, you want an A in this class? Get a C in math. And they do it. They get a B or something like that, Sometimes they just, I'll tell them, apply some of the effort you put in here. You have to make this a positive discussion though. You know, you're an idiot. You're not doing well in math. You know, you're going to be dumb. You'll never be able to add 2 and 3, which equals 6. And you don't do any put down, but you say you're doing this in here. You've got an A in here. You worked hard for that, didn't you? You know, yeah. I said, well, put some of that effort in math, and they do it. Okay, maybe it's because they want the A in your class, which I would give them anyway, because they earned it. But they also may do it to make me happy, or they may do it because they realize that they can do it, which is what you're really after. Okay, and so, I mean, that's a harder concept for adults, because once you're an adult, you have so many more serious challenges in your life. But it's getting into a martial art or jujitsu can give you a sense of real accomplishment. And yes, your goal may be, you know, it may be a bucket list issue where, okay, I got my black belt in Untitled Chapter 4. I'm dropping out of that point because I got a black belt, I'm fine. And that person has totally missed the boat. They don't have any horrors either. But I think most people who commit themselves to a martial art for the sake of learning, or even stamp collecting, what do you call it? What do you call stamp collecting? Anyone know the proper term?
Oh.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it can become a lifelong learning experience. You know, knowing where the stamps came from, they represent, yada, yada, yada. And we may think this person really needs to get a life, but if you're having success in one area, and sometimes learning a martial art, because initially it's basically physical, and eventually you realize it's also mental and psychological and everything else. There's a lot of luggage that goes along with learning a martial art. And as you get success levels, as you begin to realize, I can apply this effort to other areas as well. So why do we train? It's we're looking for perfection, maybe.
I think a couple of things. So 3 things. One, what's ornithology? Is that stamp collecting? That meant to make a stamp pun. It was on the tip of my tongue the whole time there, but is that anyway? Well, that's not important. But something occurred to me while you were talking about the student being motivated, and I think martial arts and a few other things are really excellent because they're absolutely so foreign when you start them. Like, you have to learn how to walk and you learn how to stand in your first lessons. You know, I mean, it takes you from nothing all the way through to being this new thing. You know, now you're a jujitsuka, and you were not in the beginning. So you can see, I've done this. I've gotten these belts as markers of this progress. I can do things. Here's an example of something I've done, you know?
Right.
And, you know, that cliche of whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And a lot of times people aren't doing things because they think they can't. Like, I can't learn a martial art. Have you ever tried? No, I just can't. That person's correct. They cannot. Like, they won't ever. They can't.
Right.
As soon as you say, well, I could do that, I'm going to sign up, I'll give it a try. Now you can, and you will, you know. But doing something gives you that can-do attitude. Like, now when you have a math problem, it's like, well, remember when you were, you know, held in an armbar you couldn't get out of? Now you're a green belt and you can. You know, now you can do this math problem. And I think that gives you that kind of a mentality where now you are somebody who can do things instead of somebody who can't do things.
I think it gives you
Thomas hit on a thing too when he was talking about the person who just wants to learn a self-defense technique. That person just wants to get good. And good is a really relative bar to set. Like, good compared to what? Good compared to not being able to do it whatsoever. Good compared to somebody who's expert at it. Once you get good, you're done. You can't go further because you think you're good. That person's going to leave. And what Thomas said is everyone else on the mat is there to try to get better. But he didn't say they're trying to get better at a technique. They're trying to get better. And we're all trying to get better. They're trying to get good. We're never good. We're always trying to get better. And I think that's the thing that martial arts gives you. And that's that seeking perfection and all of that. As soon as you think you're good, you're whatever you are. It might be good relative to somebody who's bad, but you're never as good as you could be. You're never better, you know, and that drives us. And then that you do get those milestones of, well, now I am a little good. So now I can get better at things. And I can get better at these other things. And maybe I'll never be good at math, but I could get better at math. You know, I think it really, I think that's the real gift of the martial arts, is that you're just getting better.
Right. I think also in the process of getting better, I think what it does is it helps. And this applies to anything that you're getting quote unquote better at, and it's in its journey. It helps you develop your self-confidence. And because you have self-confidence in one thing, it may encourage you to try to improve in other things and get better. So
I still feel I can nothing, and I
Thomas has gotten better at petting his cat, which is why the cat comes to him to get petted.
Yes.
The cat is not stupid.
She's not.
Like our dogs, this is stupid, but usually before we go to bed, I said, okay, it's time to go out and do potty patrol. Earlier this week, I spelled the word potty patrol, potty. I went to P-O-T, and both dogs got up and went to the door. I said, oh my God, they learned how to spell. So they are.
We refer to, instead of saying walk, we call it a W. So my dog doesn't get excited.
Right.
And now he just knows that we call it a W.
I mean,
so now he's excited.
They're getting better at understanding us. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead, Joni.
I know. I just said it. I have now, since I was 12, I've studied jiu-jitsu at different styles, and I still feel like I can nothing. After I saw the amount of books you had in Budoshin jiu-jitsu and all the new techniques, it was a really mind-opening. How much there is still, even though I got my black belt, I saw there's so much to study still after I have become a sensei. So for me, it was a very mind-opening. How much is there still to learn after the 20, 30 years of jiu-jitsu? So
it's as Seki said, you know, when I got my black belt, nobody just, now that you're a black, another sensei said this as well. Now that you're a black belt, you're ready to start learning the art. And it's almost endless. It's you know, there is no and we pick up, so you know, Darren may do something differently that I've never seen before, and so I'm learning something new. And you know, I think the further you go in a martial art, the more you're looking at the subtleties that will help you understand your art more and make it easier to do. Our goal is to, and I'll occasionally do this on demonstration. I think I've done it before. If I go to my uke and just go, and they'll do a front flip. I say, that's a secret technique. And they're wondering, how did this movement cause him to take a forward ukemi? Okay, secret technique. So, you know, it's our goal, I think, for many of us is I like to see the subtleties, different versions of jujitsu and even other martial arts, because I learn from those. Say, that's a better way of doing this technique. Okay. And sometimes it is. And I think that's, you know, our goal, as Thomas said, is to get better. And
Especially, I really liked it in your book, the versions of Thai Otosi. I haven't figured that out by myself, that actually you can make a Thai Otosi from different hand locks, and you just make you have 5 techniques immediately, but just making a different hand lock and making a Thai Otosi on top of that. That was pretty genius to see that somebody has invented that.
yeah, but I didn't invent it. I mean, it's just I think is we really don't invent anything. We explore, we find, oh, this is a different way of doing this technique. And if I've had students come to me and say, oh, I've got a different way of doing this technique, or I've got a new technique. And I'll say to them, okay, I'll have them do it with me. Say, okay, show it to the class. And if students in the class can do it, it has some legitimacy as a technique. If they're the only one that can do it, but they can do it on other people, it's their technique. And some people, because of their physiology, can do certain things that other people can't. I had one student years ago who was so double jointed it was pathetic. He could do all sorts of cool techniques that the rest of us in the class could not do because we couldn't maneuver our bodies. You know, when you can bend your arm both ways, you can get yourself into all sorts of neat techniques, okay, that are legitimate for him. Okay. And my only warning to him was, because he was so double jointed, so loosely jointed, was don't abuse your body, because otherwise you'll be looking at arthritis much earlier than most other people will. Okay. Now, unfortunately, he didn't heed my word, and by the time he was 25, he was having problems. But you know, it's you know, and I felt sorry for him, because he had a tremendous skill level, and you know, as I tell my students, you only get one body, take care of it.
It's still self-defense. Got to defend it.
Yeah.
Pardon?
You have to defend it even from yourself.
Yeah.
Self-defense. You got to take care of yourself.
Yes, you do. Yeah. And you know, I hate to say you have to look at yourself as number one, but if you don't take care of number one, you can't take care of anyone else. Okay. Do we want to get into core techniques today, or do you want to save that for next time?
Save it.
You want to save it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know if we will be getting together on the 16th. So I will probably make a decision on that in the next few days once I see what else is going on. But I will let you know. We may have to skip the second meeting this month, which will give you 3 or 4 weeks off of good behavior. Anyway, so any other comments? Or we do have, see, how many topics do we have left? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more general topics left on the list. So if any of you can think of any other topics or new things we can talk about, I don't want to reinvent the wheel on anything, but if you have some outrageous thoughts you'd like to see discussed, or let me know. And or you want to discuss someone's theory or some other element of martial arts, we're all game, because we all want to be better people, right, Thomas?
Yes, sir. That's the goal.
That's the goal. Okay. So I have a good weekend. We have a little rain coming here this weekend again, which has really been a lot for us. But the news media gets excited over an inch. But anyway, so, and at the elevation we're at, we don't have to worry about it, and life goes on. So, and no, the snow behind us is from February of last year. So, but it's a nice scenery, nice backdrop. Anyway, hope you have a good weekend. And
Thank you to everybody. Have a good weekend, everybody. Many thanks.
don't do anything too dangerous. Okay, there.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.